All right, and welcome back. We have Patrick Ryan from the Alaska Botanical Gardens with us this afternoon to talk to us about the life of spruce, the spruce cycle of, and so we will move on to the stage and introduce Mr. Patrick Ryan.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me. Did this a couple years ago, and we talked about landscaping with native plants, and this kind of fits in with that too. And I did give this title, "Trees Don't Cost, They Pay," because we're going to talk in general about some trees and then get down to our spruce trees, which, as you know, are suffering a bit right now. I lost a 60-foot spruce in my backyard. It did have beetles, spruce beetles, but it was also stressed out from drought last year. It was growing between two sheds, which we had put the sheds in, but we hadn't planted that tree because it's been there a long time. And it is heartbreaking to lose one of those guys. Beautiful things, and even in the winter, they're so gorgeous. It's like losing a family member. It was hurtful and expensive too, but irreplaceable to plant something like that. So we want to kind of look in a little bit about the value of trees in so many ways that they do pay for us. So there we go. So what is a tree? Well, we know what it is, but it's kind of hard to say what it is. This is a shot out at Camp Gorsuch a couple of springs ago, and it shows a lot of birch trees that are very tall and thin, and what we call the uniformity of the forest. They're all the same height. They had been taking down a lot of cottonwoods that were getting a little bit older, but the forest out there was pretty healthy. A few signs of beetle kill out there. But what is a tree? Well, a tree is a woody perennial plant, typically having a single stem, which we call a trunk, of course, you know this, growing to considerable height and bearing side branches at some distance from the ground. And so the term woody means just that. An herbaceous plant would be like fireweed. It dies completely back to the ground and can come back from the roots like a perennial plant does that. A tree is considered a woody thing. Something like an aspen or an alder rather, alder or willows can actually grow tree size, but they're usually multiple trunks, and that's often considered a shrub rather than a tree, although they can get pretty big. George Bernard Shaw said, "Think of the fierce energy concentrated in an acorn. You bury it in the ground and it explodes into an oak. You bury a sheep and nothing happens but decay." So that's the miracle of these guys. And we're going to look at some slides of what the birch trees are doing now and what the spruce trees are doing now to send their seeds out. But they definitely explode into something. How can that tiny, tiny seed make something as magnificent and as big as our beautiful spruce trees that we have? So here's a kind of a kid picture, but it's a good way to think of our forest too. We do have not a tropical rainforest in Alaska, but our temperate rainforest in southeast, and kind of a girdwood also. So this is a good way to think of our layers of our forest. So the emergent layer would be some really tall trees that we have. As you drive around Anchorage especially, you can look on the horizon, look around town and see the cottonwoods are the big tall ones. They're the emergent layers. The canopy would be our spruce and birch that are all about the same size. Again, that uniformity of the forest. If you look outside or as you're driving around, just notice that they're all the same there. Under that, you've got your understory, which would be more of your shrubs, your wild roses, hibiscus cranberry, currants, all those kind of bushy, shrubby type of plants. And under that is the forest floor. That's all our little wildflowers, our Canadian dogwood, mosses and lichens and all those kind of things. So that's a good way to think of the forest and how it functions. And there's a shot from the botanical garden showing exactly that. So got the birch and the spruce below that, some sunlight on some shrubs, high bush cranberry and roses, and underneath that oak ferns and dogwood and the smaller things in there. So it's all kind of part of a plan, and it works in a landscape, it works in nature, and there's a reason that it's all set up that way. So two kinds of trees basically we're talking about. I want to get to the spruce today, but a deciduous tree drops its leaves like a birch. I know you know a lot of this. I just kind of wanted to go over some of this though. Deciduous are I'm looking at the columnar quaking aspen outside the window here at the facility. Those have gotten to be a popular landscape tree here, but our birch trees are aspen trees. All deciduous, they lose their leaves, and then coniferous means they have cones, and be our spruce. We do have a few pines that have been planted around Anchorage, but not native pines in our area. It's more in southeast. It seems to me pines have become moose food because they decimated our lodgepole pine before it blew down in the wind. So another problem with trees. So the cone-bearing trees, though, they are doing their thing right now, and there's deciduous trees also, and we'll look a little bit more into that. So anatomy of a tree, what's inside, this will help us kind of when we're looking at talking about the birch beetles. So obviously the bark on the outside is the tough outer skin. Underneath that you got your cambium layer, and then the sapwood and the heartwood. All this goes together, making these very sturdy trees. So each of the parts has a function. The leaves carry out photosynthesis, making food for the tree. It tells us about their shape. Douglas fir can expose as much as 3 acres of chlorophyll surface to the sun. The lobes or leaflets and the jagged edges of many broadleaves have their uses. They help evaporate the water used in food building, reduce wind resistance, and even provide drip tips to shed the rain left standing could decay the leaf. So leaves have a function. A tree itself is a factory, and the leaves are a big part of that factory. So again, I taught first grade for 21 years, so I sometimes revert to kid stuff. So that's kind of a kid thing. But it's good to know. So my earlobe, we have lobe leaves. That one's easy to remember. And then the toothed leaves like a saw blade. So those are two that are good when you're doing plant IDs or just noticing things out in nature. It's fun to have a little bit of background with that. Here's another one that's so helpful. We get a lot of calls at the garden about plant IDs. People send us pictures, and sometimes not very good pictures, and I can't really tell what it is. So I need several shots and close up, far away, where it is, sunshade. But this is a very valuable thing for a plant ID. So are the leaves alternate? They're kind of taking turn on the stem. They are not straight across. An opposite leaf would be like this. And the two best plants to demonstrate that would be high bush cranberry, which would be opposite. The leaves are straight across from each other. And then currants, which are alternate. And the way you remember that is alternate current, ACDC. Just a little memory trick for that. So that's a good one to know, because they look somewhat similar like maple leaves. But both beautiful landscape plants. Wonderful fruit. High bush cranberry, amazing fruit. Angela and I were talking about someone should be making fruit leather out of high bush cranberry, because it's just huge in the department of vitamins and things, and it'd be a wonderful opportunity for someone. And the currants, beautiful. We have an abundant supply at the garden right now. And beautiful fall color on those two, our native currants. So two great plants that are fun to be familiar with. So in other parts of the tree, the branches and twigs grow out of the tree, of course. And as a landscape element, we see twigs, bare twigs, for quite a large part of the year. So good to kind of observe them. They're also part of the transportation system. The leaves send the food to the tree through the branches and twigs. It's all part of the big plan. The trunk is 5 layers. That outer bark, we looked at that other drawing, the inner bark or the phloem, and the cambium and sapwood and heartwood. And that underneath the bark, that's where the spruce beetles are getting into, and we'll look at some pictures of that and some information on that. So if you have spruce trees, especially larger ones on your property, might be worth taking a look and see if there are little holes in there where the pitch has oozed out because the tree's trying to stop the digging that's going on. And then sometimes you see what I call frass on the ground, the little sawdust that's been drilled out. Again, the bark is the protection, keeps getting renewed from within. It keeps drying the new growth and adds to it, protects against heat and cold, warns off insect enemies for the most part. Having trouble with that. Here's another kind of a simple drawing too again, but shows the phloem is the pipeline of the food where the food in the tree goes up and down from the branches, goes up in the spring, the nutrients in the water, comes down in the fall and stores it in the roots for the next year. This will help us kind of figure out about those spruce beetles again. So here's that cambium, the growing part. This is where the spruce beetles are getting, just underneath the bark there. This shows a close-up of that, and this is actually someone grafting, maybe an apple tree grafting a different type of apple or something onto a tree. You cut through that bark into that phloem layer and put your sign in there, and you can actually have multiple varieties onto one apple tree. But that shows you just underneath the bark where the spruce beetles tunnel through, and we'll show you some of they're called galleries, the little trails, and you've probably seen those, like a little maze underneath the bark. The sapwood, the tree's pipeline, we talked about that. It's the new wood, and it becomes older, turns into the heartwood. This is interesting. Heartwood is the central supporting pillar. That last sentence, set vertically, a 1-inch by 2-inch cross section that's 12 inches long can support 20 tons. The wood is so strong, so powerful. Amazing stuff. I just have so much respect for trees. I spent a lot of time in trees as a kid. I was always climbing trees and loved to be up there on a windy day and you're in a big old spruce tree and waving back and forth, and just, I guess I've been a tree nerd for a long time. And it's kind of like the Lorax. He says, I speak for the trees. So that's what I'm doing today. So study of tree rings. Here's a fun word that you can use in a sentence today. Bring this up at dinner. The word is dendrochronology. What a wonderful word. It just means the study of tree rings. I'll look at another slide for there. So use that word dendrochronology in a sentence today. So there's a cross-section of a tree showing some of the things. So of course right in the middle, the little dot was the first year of that tree, and then where the kind of the yellow layers are, the darker yellow, there's some good growth there, some pretty far spaces. If the rings are spaced far apart, it was a good growth here. If they're a little closer together, it was not so good. May have been something to do with wood or weather and water. So you can see sometimes where the forest fire has damaged something, or insects. So it does tell a story. That tree that we had cut down, there were about 60 rings on there, as well as I could count them. They're so close together. A 60-year-old tree in Oregon would probably be this big. And we're going to talk about measuring trees a little bit too. There's a way to do that. Our trees are slower growing, so a 60-year-old tree is going to be about this big, a spruce, and sometimes a birch too, about that way, because we've had others cut down, and I always check the rings. So a little slower growing for us because of the cold. So there's a tree rings, just an old picture of like when the Vikings were around in 550 AD, and 1,300 years later this tree got cut down. So it lived that long, and that is a real tree. It's a picture of the guy standing there, but that is a real tree. So they can be very long-lived. So the roots are interesting. Contrary to popular belief, the roots really don't go down much beyond the 3 feet of soil. And the reason this is helpful to know and to observe is, we've got a picture coming up there. I'll show you, our soils are so cold too that the tree roots don't want to go down too much. I've got a picture of a shot from the garden where the roots are like what you see in this picture. Some trees have the big taproot that goes down pretty far, but mostly it's the roots that are spreading out, the lateral roots, and then little tiny root hairs. So if you're watering your trees, which you should be doing, especially your spruce trees, you have a cone-shaped spruce tree, which would basically have a circle at the bottom. You know, imagine a cone, and that's called the drip line, the outer edges of that, where when it rains, it's not getting wet underneath that tree, but the drip line is where the water's going. That's where you water. That's where the feeder roots are, and extending beyond that too. But we'll look at another picture here. This one's actually from the garden. It's on our forest health trail, and I sometimes hike out there or take groups out there, and I always have to remind myself of these roots are right there. The soil, again, is so cold, it's just staying close to the top. The roots are on top of the soil because it's warmer there. And I stumble every time, even though I know they're there. These are some other, we don't need to dwell on this, but a 60-second guide to cold weather adaptations. A couple of them are pretty interesting, that our aspen trees, you notice they're kind of greenish bark. They can actually photosynthesize in the winter because of that. They can absorb that and make use of sunlight to have food for their plants, for the tree. So that was kind of a cool thing. Talked about shallow root systems. Trees kind of are smart in a way. They have small leaves, sometimes conserve water, which can be lost through the leaf surface. That's called transpiration when the plant is breathing. The smaller leaves won't do that quite as much. So plants seem like they're smart. They know what to do. So for the homeowner in your backyard, trees in your backyard can be home to wildlife, can reduce your heating and cooling, help clean the air, add beauty and color. And you know what? Having beauty is enough, I think, for me. Provide shelter from the wind, rain, and the sun, and add value to your home. Benefits of trees: they work for us. Properly cared for, they're valuable assets worth 3 times your initial investment. Healthy trees mean healthy people. 100 trees remove 53 tons of carbon dioxide and 430 pounds of other air pollutants per year. Healthy communities: tree-filled neighborhoods lower levels of domestic violence and are safer and more sociable. There's that kind of fake picture of Anchorage with the mountains much higher than they really are. That's a great picture. Healthy environment: 100 mature trees catch about almost 140,000 gallons of rainwater per year, which could flood otherwise. Homeowner savings: strategically placed trees save up to 56% on annual air conditioning, and evergreens that block winter winds can save 3% on heating. Better business: consumers shop more frequently and longer in tree-lined commercial areas that are willing to spend more. You just feel more comfortable with trees around you, and a lot of statistics will bear this out, which I didn't want to bog you down with, but it's true. Higher property values: each large front yard tree adds to a home sale price. And then trees in the landscape: number of months of display. Flowers, not very long, about 1 to 3 weeks. They don't last very long, the crab apples and things. We had lilacs bloom for a pretty good long time this year, more a shrub, but nice to have those. Leaves, we really only have May, maybe more into September, a little bit of October. We get some color there, so we have a few months of leaves. Twigs, we see 8 months, bare twigs. That's where if you have red twig dogwood as a landscape shrub, it's beautiful in the winter, and you can see those red twigs. The bark we see 12 months, and right there that tells you I should have a birch tree in my yard because we got that beautiful color. Also, a non-native tree is the Emmer chokecherry, Prunus mackii, is that kind of golden bark tree that you see around Anchorage. Very attractive too. So we're good with both of those kind of trees for the whole year. So what's harming our trees? Spruce beetles, obviously. We don't say spruce bark beetle so much anymore. We know what it is. We just shorten it to spruce beetle. The amber-marked birch leaf miner, we're going to look at all these things. Drought, not so bad this year. Last year was pretty brutal. Fire last year, brutal. Not so bad this year. Loss of open space is harming trees. So kind of a small picture, but they're kind of a small insect too. So the picture on the right is the bark of ponderosa pine with little tiny holes in there, and that's the entry holes for the spruce beetles getting in there. And as I mentioned, on spruce or pine, you'll have the pitch will come out, the resin will come out those holes because the tree's trying to stop the invasion. So that's what you end up with. The bark can be peeled off by, I've seen woodpeckers going after the spruce beetles underneath the bark, so that's one way to get it pulled off. Also, squirrels will dig around there to get to the larvae in there, especially. On the upper right, you can see the galleries are the little, look like a maze or little trails, and that's from the insects tunneling underneath the bark. And you don't see that. You see those little holes, and you don't get to see this going underneath it. The tree we cut down, I debarked the big sections. They were 16 inches. The guy cut them for me for firewood, but they're about this big around. And I peeled the bark off that and loaded with larvae and insects and the mature insects. So that was in May, which was the time to get these guys. Didn't want to see that, but there they are. This is last summer up in the valley. I was driving on one of the roads up around Wasilla, and it looks like this beautiful fall color yellow birch trees, but it's actually the birch leaf miner, how the leaves are really dead and dried up, and you see a few on the ground now at the garden. I'm not seeing that too badly this year yet. So that's what you end up with, the amber-marked birch leaf miner. On that leaf, on the opposite, the text there's a little circle, and when you get a leaf like that, you hold that up like an x-ray, and inside that circle is this guy, a birch edge miner, and that's a sawfly larva. It's not a caterpillar, so you can't use insect spray or something that's for caterpillars because it won't affect that guy. So you would need to find something else if you needed to. You will see a few leaves falling. You will see these guys on our school field trips. If I show the kids this, then that's the end. That's all they want to do is find those little guys. You pull the layers of the leaves apart, and that's who's in there eating those up. But they can survive that. There has been a few years ago a small wasp that was released. It's one of those wasps that lays eggs inside this little guy, and when the eggs hatch out of the wasp, it rips open the insect. It's like the coolest monster movie ever. It's nature. She knows what to do. So I haven't heard anything about those for a few years, so we'll keep an eye on things. Again, on your property, just water would be very helpful. So this is from a book, Insects of Alaska, and it just shows, I know it's not easy to see there, caterpillars have a certain kind of face, and the guy down below is the sawfly larva. Their head there, they have like little fake eye spots, so they're different. So again, you can't use caterpillar chemicals on your birch trees on the sawfly larva, but just keeping them well watered will be helpful for you. Our birch trees covered with aphids too. Anybody have aphids on their birch trees right now? Yeah. I was cutting the grass the other day and walked underneath a birch. I let the branches kind of drape down and just, they were all over me, just clouds of them. Unfortunately, they're born pregnant and alive and ready to go, so they're hard to get ahead of. But again, damage is somewhat minimal. If your car is parked underneath a birch tree, though, you might have noticed the sticky honeydew. You've seen that? I think, oh, okay. This honeydew gets on your car. It's all sticky, and then it can mold to it, and I get this black mold to it. So that's not fun. It's the sugar from the plants that they're sucking. Wind can damage our trees, and again, remember we talked about how the roots go sideways, and you may have seen this around town where a big tree has been blown over, and there's all the roots just standing up right there because they're not really deep. So that's a disadvantage of shallow roots for us. Here's a bug we don't have in our forest yet, the emerald ash borer. It's actually a beautiful insect, very shiny green. They are working their way from the East Coast. They're at least in Colorado by now. Kind of we're observing to see if they're going to show up here. We don't want them here. We really don't have a lot of ash trees. We have a mountain ash, which is not really a true ash, so, but they may not be that particular. So we're kind of trying to monitor for these guys. It actually is a beautiful insect, though. This one, not so beautiful. That's the Asian longhorn beetle larva. Look at that thing. That is scary looking. And we have longhorn beetles in Alaska. They look like that, but they're not this variety. Again, it's a tree enemy. So at the garden we have some Lindgren traps. The Forest Service was monitoring this. I don't think we've actually kept this up. But for years we had these traps baited. The insects fly into these bowls. They can't figure out how to get out. They drop down to the white can at the bottom, and that's collected and taken back to a laboratory and count and see how many of certain kinds of insects are there, and again monitoring for some of these bad guys. At the garden in the spring we also tap the trees. Just want to throw that in there, and have a glass of that in the morning. It's pretty invigorating, really. And with kids, again, they think it's syrup. They think it's going to be like sweet maple syrup or something. It's not. Again, like the chaga, it's kind of an earthy taste, but refreshing, and I do feel invigorated after that. So that's kind of a fun thing with our birches. Speaking of birches, has anybody seen these little guys around? Yeah, if you have birch trees, you have, like over here on this cuttings here, the little catkins, which are now dried and dropping their bracts and seeds. For many years, I would only see those bracts, which looks like a spruce grouse or something flying. It reminds me of a pheasant. And the other thing is the seed with little wings on it. It looks kind of like a butterfly. So they're stacked up like pancakes. You've got a seed and a bract, seed and a bract. And the seeds come hang gliding down on the bracts, and they are just everywhere. Does anybody notice that at your house? Yeah. Get lots of calls on that in the spring. What are those little tiny plants that are growing there? It's all the birch trees that came from these seeds. So this is called mast, M-A-S-T, when trees make nuts or seeds or this type of thing. Like the maples have those seeds that helicopter out. These guys don't helicopter so much, but they do drift down, and they are everywhere. And we were talking earlier that if we all left right now, especially like at the Botanical Garden, left all our parks for 20 years and came back, there would be so many birch trees growing there. So it seems like it's a good year for the mast, for the birch trees, which is good for chaga and tapping as they age. So here's the spruce seed, which are in the cones, of course, and these guys do helicopter out. They fly away from the tree because if they go under that drip line that we were talking about, they can't grow there because there's not going to be water, there's not going to be much light, and so the tree is smart enough to send their babies flying. And I just recently dug up probably 200 small spruce trees, anywhere from 2 inches to about 6 inches, which are perfect little trees. So if you have open gardens on your property, or somewhere that you can go to find those, if you would like to harvest some of those, they can dig those up. Make sure you're not on private property. But I have a stash of trees at the garden that kids have planted, and I'm on the Community Forest Council here in Anchorage, and we have a little nursery kind of that when we're able to, we'll have another tree planting. Last year we planted with Clark Middle School, and we planted about 75 trees along Campbell Creek near Tudor and in the park there. And hopefully we can do that again. So we've got a whole supply of little trees. But as we were cleaning up this area, I wanted to put down a weed mat to keep the weeds and the alders from growing up through there. And I've got to save each of these little trees. We dug up 200 of them and repotted them. So in 5 or 6 years, we'll have nice little 2-foot trees. I'll show you a picture of some of those. And that's what you'll see out maybe in your gardens, or if you have pots that stay out, container plants of flowers and different things. These guys start appearing. And you might not recognize that as a mighty 60-foot tall white spruce tree, but that's what that is. It's only 1 inch tall. You can see the shadow is almost a better picture than the actual tree. And it looks like, to me, an umbrella with no fabric on it, like the fabric blew off or something. But that guy will turn into our beautiful spruce trees. The funny thing was that when I dug this one up, that was the seed, the little, kind of like a wafer, a little helicopter that had come down, and I think that's probably from that seed right there. So be on the lookout for those. Anytime I see one, I have to save them. We had a kid in our camp this year, and I've had her several years in our camp. She's always finding these, and she just wants to save everyone too, which is fine with me. I love these little guys. So after about a year, that's what you have. And they'll be happy in that pot for a couple of years. And they should not be brought inside. It's not a house plant. They don't mind being totally buried in snow. You just have to make sure they're getting water. The smaller the pot, the quicker they dry out. So if you're going to plant something like this, I would use a little, like a 1 gallon size pot, and plant it in there, and it can stay in there for 5 years. And by then you'll have about a 3-foot tall tree. So since our spruce are rapidly coming under attack, and we're going to need to replace them with something. We're going to talk about that. The obvious choice to me is the white spruce. Replace the white spruce with the white spruce. I think a lot of people had the idea that all the trees were going to die, and that is not true. There are just some that are more susceptible. And again, I personally lost one, and I miss it. Plus, now I can look across my yard into the neighbor's yard and see this big orange Connex trailer that they have in the back of their yard, which I never saw before. So I need a big tree fast. It just can't do it, though. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about replacements. So just some beautiful trees. These are some in the garden. There's a high bush cranberry there. There's a mountain ash. Has the wonderful berries, which are attractive to those waxwings in the spring and winter. Some of these are over at UAA, some various kinds of trees that you can take a tree walk at UAA, and they've got a map of where quite a number of trees are planted over there, lots of different varieties. And that's a good place to go and decide, hey, I would want one of those, because we're ending up replacing our spruce, and also it's advisable to replace your Prunus patis, the Mayday tree, which has become invasive. And if you take that out, you might want a replacement tree. This is probably a crabapple here. I don't quite recall. That's definitely a crab. So that's on the good list. This is at the garden. Just how beautiful is that when you have a trail like that too? It just, to me, it makes me want to go there and see what's around the bend. Look at that green color. And a little too soon to think about this, but how beautiful is that? Look at that birch all arched over, weighted down in the snow. The garden's a great place to be on the first snow, or any time it's snowing. It's so quiet and so gorgeous to get out. And what makes nature even better are those trees. Look at that, even in the hoarfrost, all coated, beautiful. Mostly birch there. So my friend Jason Moan is with the Forest Service, and we were doing a winter snowshoe walk, and yes, he's hugging a tree. And I was thinking about that. I would consider myself a tree hugger too, and I guess that was intended to be an insult years ago. It's like, to some people, I think it's a compliment. So what he's doing is kind of related to this. I wanted to mention this to you because we don't have really giant champion trees, they call them in other states, and you can actually have a giant tree registered as a champion tree. And then there are historical trees also. You can find information about that through the Arbor Day Society is one place. But something that maybe grew on George Washington's property is still alive. So a historical tree. A champion tree is one that's just achieved a large size. And our cottonwoods would get pretty big like that, but we don't really get huge spruce here. Just like the one I had is about as big as it gets. So this is called DBH, diameter at breast height, so about chest height. And that's why I'm kind of hugging that tree. And you know, that's how tall you are, okay, from fingertip to fingertip. That's pretty close to how tall you are. So I'm a little over 6 feet. When I hug a tree like this, that tree in diameter is six feet, which seems amazing, but it's true. So DBH, diameter at breast height. So the one I lost was a little bigger than that one, and the guy that was cutting it down, it was Paul's Tree Service, by the way, who's an awesome guy. He first climbed up and limbed it. He took all the limbs off with the chainsaw, and then went back up and started cutting 16-inch logs so I could have the firewood. And he was just throwing them down from the top of the tree. That guy must be like the Hulk or something. He was throwing those big pieces, and I've had to move them, so I'm glad I wasn't throwing them from the tree. But DBH is a good thing to know. And again, the one I lost was probably 60 years old, 60 feet tall, irreplaceable at this stage. I mean, I can plant something. The quickest thing I think to plant would be a larch, pretty fast growing, but of course they lose their needles in the winter, so you wouldn't have that blocking that connex I was talking about. Here's another thing through the DNR and forestry, how to measure a big tree. We won't get into that. That's a kind of a big tree, maybe a champion tree there. Some other resources. This is a good one to look at. It's Common Trees of Alaska. It's a little flyer from the Forest Service. So it's FS Forest Service, USDA.gov. And you can track that down there. And if you have interest in that, I can get that to you. A couple more sources. Just learning more about urban trees. We won't dwell on that right now. I do have a poem for you, though. Trees are the kindest things I know. They do no harm, they simply grow, and spread a shade for sleepy cows, and gather birds among their boughs. They give us fruit and leaves above, and wood to make our houses of, and leaves to burn on Halloween, and in the spring new buds of green. They are first when day's begun to touch the beams of morning sun. They are last to hold the light when evening changes into night. And when a moon floats on the sky, they hum a drowsy lullaby of sleepy children long ago, trees are the kindest things I know. I love that third stanza. We were looking last night out our front window, and the light is coming from the sunset, and the tops of the neighboring trees are all lit up. Beautiful. There's a spruce like a couple blocks from my house that's just glowing in gold, and it's gorgeous, and I've got to go find that tree where it is in our neighborhood. So beautiful. And then we used to tell our kids when they were little, when the light went to the top of the trees, it was time to come in, so they could play in our circle, but that's when they had to come in. So I think I shall never see a billboard lovely as a tree. Perhaps unless the billboards fall, I'll never see a tree at all. A little humor from Ogden Nash. Chinese proverb, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Okay, so again, we talked about that. Water really is one of your best things. You can fertilize out at that drip line. You can, there's actually like a big long hypodermic needle thing that hooks up to your hose, and you can just water with that too. You can also drill little holes in there and add granular fertilizer on there. I'm not a big fan of the deadly chemical sprays, because when they spray that, it's not going to just stay on your tree. It's going to drift around, and it's not selective for not getting bees and different things. So that's a personal decision. In my opinion, I would not use that. Our tree went so fast though, I didn't notice it till the end of, we were cleaning up the yard in the fall, end of summer, and my wife and I both looked and said, what is wrong with that tree? I thought the light was funny. We went out and looked, and it was just dead. It was a combination of drought and beetles. It was drought stress, so the beetles were able to get in there. So again, it's like losing a family friend. Pretty tough. So the other side of that coin is, are you going to replace that tree? I would like to, but where it was growing between those sheds we put in is not a good place. I would like my neighbors to plant a tree so I don't have to look into their yard. But again, what are we going to plant? I think the white spruce is a perfectly viable option. I would encourage you to look into native trees and plants for your garden. That was kind of our last talk that I did with you all, and I don't know if that exists somewhere in cyberspace. So native things would have native birds and things that would be attracted to it, and their own insects that are pests, but then the birds eat those guys too. So there's this whole thing, it's called nature, that she's got going on, and it kind of all works together unless we get in there and kind of mess things up. So plant a tree. Save those little babies if you can find those. So, all right, I'm good. If anybody has any questions, I might not know an answer, but I can make something up.
So we do have some questions. Thank you very
good.
much for your presentation.
Yeah.
The first one is, how far apart should we plant the trees?
If you were planting spruce, and you saw the picture of my little ones that are about a foot, and that's what you buy at it's the Society of American Foresters has that tree sale around Arbor Day. This year it was delayed because of things happening, and they had a contactless pickup, but for about $2 you can get a little seedling that has been tube grown. So they've got like a test tube rack of all these little tubes, and it's full of soil, and they drop a seed in there, and they would sell lodgepole pine, white spruce, white birch, and larch. And we have a few at the garden still for sale. We bought some. And the thing to think about is, and I'm imagining houses that have a nice sidewalk coming up to your house and coming to the front porch, and you plant two little baby spruce trees on either side of the sidewalk. Oh, they look so cute. But after 10 years, you won't be able to get into your house. So imagine them growing. Give them space to grow. So depending on the variety that you have, or if you do a deciduous tree, it's going to have your trunk, and most of the branches are going to be up above. But depends on the tree, really, but not too close together. And you can move them pretty easily until they're about 6 feet tall, and then that gets to be a little bit of a chore. So do a little research, find out what tree you want and what you have, and give it room to grow. We say right tree, right place. Don't plant it under a power line because they'll come and chop it off because it can fall into the power lines during the winter.
Nice. So they also asked, what kind of flowers or plants do you plant around them? They hear that plants or flowers can pass sicknesses to each other to remain healthy.
Um, Trees are pretty tough with that. I can't think of anything that we have that's really bad. There's actually from the Forest Service there a book of ornamental diseases, ornamental plants diseases and insects that affect them, and there's one for our wild stuff out in the forest. There's a whole little booklet of this, and you start looking at this and you wonder how anything lives at all because there's so many things that are attacking it. But basically, if it's a healthy tree, it's going to be okay. If I was going to plant something around a tree, the facility here at the hospital is so beautiful out here. The landscaping is so well done. You can get some ideas if you're visiting over here. Underneath a tree, though, is the question that we get a lot, is what can I plant underneath the spruce? And nothing's going to grow very well there unless you add water. We talked about those oak ferns, those small little ferns that are wild here. And there's a Canada violet that would do well, a couple other things. But otherwise, underneath the spruce tree, I might just do a container of something, like have a nice sized pot and come up with some little design and just do containers. Don't worry about, because the roots are there too. It's hard to dig down there.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. And if you were to cut off a root, would you damage the tree?
Possibly, but I've whacked a few in my time. And if they're putting in cable at your house or something, they're going to whack a few there. So not necessarily.
Okay. How many trees can you use for medicine? I don't know if you know the answer.
Gosh, probably all of them. I again, not representing anybody but myself when I say this kind of stuff, but I think everything we need is out there if we could just figure it out. It's like the chaga. Who knew? It's like this kind of strange looking thing on a tree, and it's like the first person they say whoever ate a lobster is like, how did they know that was good to eat? Kind of weird, but I just think it's all out there in the plant world. We just don't know everything. So, of course, there are fruit trees and nut trees. We don't really have any nut trees in Alaska. The birch can give us the syrup from making out of the sap. I know the spruce has actually, there are stories of people using the resin for gum. It used to be told that it was something to ward off witches if you slept under a spruce tree. So there are lots of stories that go back relating to a lot of these guys, but there are probably, spruce tips you can eat. I think someone did a presentation or is doing a presentation. They actually make local beer out of spruce tips. So I'd say just about everything, but we don't know it all yet. And so don't go eating stuff that you don't know what it is, like mushrooms. You need to be with an expert before you eat those wild mushrooms.
All right. And if a spruce tree is cut down due to the insects, is the tree recycled for anything or can be used for anything?
Firewood. Basically, I don't know if Jesse talked about that. You should debark the tree, and when I debarked mine, the bark peeled right off, and there were all the larvae and the adults right there. But that's when it's split. It's going to the fire pit. I don't know if it had those galleries, the little trails through there. That might be, if it was cut into lumber, might be an interesting wood. They wouldn't still be living in there. But I'm thinking of HGTV, like something cool that you could do a room in. I don't know of anything like that except the firewood, really. And on that note, that if you do split up your beetle kill firewood, don't haul it somewhere else because you're probably transporting the beetles somewhere else. So keep it on site.
Okay. When the woodpecker is eating the insects, are they damaging the tree as well?
They're pretty far gone by that point that it really doesn't matter. And actually, last year we had, was it last year or 2 years already? The MLK fire right over here, actually. I thought I was out of a job at the Botanical Garden. That was pretty close to home. But about 2 weeks after, I walked in there with our head of our forest council, and there was already some plants coming back, but there were so many woodpeckers and all these different varieties, and they were getting the spruce beetles who were in those kind of burned and bug-infested trees. I imagined that the spruce beetles were like toasted sesame seeds because they'd all had been a little burned. So I don't know. There were so many woodpeckers of all different kinds there. So yeah, when they're doing that, the tree's gone anyway.
Okay.
So
When tapping trees, what equipment would you recommend?
well, you get those bags, and I think Mill and Feed maybe sells them. There's a little kind of a plug thing that you hammer in, a little metal thing, and it's got a hook on it, and then you get the bags, which are reusable and cleanable, and that thing in the morning will fill up, and it's a couple gallons in there. So I think Mill and Feed is where we got those. So it's fun.
Yeah.
As long as you're not using like poison chemicals on your trees that are going to end up in that. So
When is the best time to tap a birch tree, and can you tap all trees?
I don't think I'd tap a spruce. I might get all resin. No, early spring. Couldn't give you an exact date. I bet there's something on the internet about that. I'd have to do a little bit more research, but early spring.
Yeah, my son's birthday's May 1st, and we gotta hurry up and do it. So it's like the last 2 weeks of April and
There you go.
in May, but you kind of watch for it because it depends. Because it's only like a 2 to 3 week
Yeah.
period of time.
And it takes, like maple syrup, I think it's 1 gallon of maple syrup. It takes about 30 gallons of the sap, and I think for birch it's way more even. So if you're eating those birch candies or birch syrup,
It's a lot.
treasure them. But yeah, give it a try. It's fun.
We like having the birch water. So-
Nice.
And then tomorrow we're going to talk about birch a little bit more.
Oh, good.
And, Chef Amy made some birch sourdough. So
Nice.
pretty nice. So, thank
Cool.
you very much, Pat.
Good. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
We
Thanks for the
appreciate having you
opportunity.
here.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you.